When do you work on your marriage? When you duck and miss a shoot. There was a time no church had youth ministry. Now 99% of evangelical churches
have a youth
ministry.
program, right?
There was a time that nobody did premarital counseling. Why in the world would you have youth and premarital and just zero marriage? Welcome to the Grace Marriage Podcast. I'm Brad Rhoads.
And I'm Marilyn Rhoads. We're here to help you build a marriage that's stronger, more connected, and full of grace.
I'm Rick Dayton, joining Brad and Marilyn as we bring you weekly conversations designed to inspire and equip you to live intentionally in your marriage.
We'll share practical tips, powerful stories, and strategies to help you and your spouse grow closer and thrive together.
So whether you're just starting out or have been married for years, there's always room to grow. Let's do this together. This is the Grace Marriage Podcast.
Grace Marriage Podcast continues. I'm Rick Dayton, Brad Rhoads, joined by Jamus and Annie Edwards. This is the second part of our conversation with them. James, a pastor of a church, and Grace Marriage has been a big part of what your church is all about. But Annie, Grace Marriage has also been part of what your marriage is about. So first of all, Annie, help me to sort of understand, when you started going through this, what did it do for your marriage before we get to what it did for the church? What did it do for your marriage?
It helped me to be thankful and see the evidences of grace in Jamus's life, because one of the things that we do when we sit down in Grace Marriage, the very first thing is, I just forgot the name of it.
The eye exam.
Eye exam. There we go. Okay. It's so important that I forgot the name of it. But you sit down and you're writing down thanks to God for the things that you have in your husband and your family. And I think it just changes the whole atmosphere when you start that way. And that's been a practice that I do now just in my everyday life.
It's an attitude of gratitude.
Yeah. I don't even have to think about it. I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking through the things I'm thankful for and talking to the Lord about it.
So how did that change how you look at this guy?
Yeah, it just helped me to start looking for God's work in his life and the fruits and the evidence of God being faithful to him. And so instead of seeing all the things I want to fix or the things that are annoying, it helps me to shift my focus and think on those things.
So same question to you, Jamus. What did Grace Marriage do as you were working through the changes of how you wanted to treat your wife, how you wanted to be married?
Yeah, just being reminded every time we gather for Grace Marriage of the grace and love of Jesus and how much we've been a recipient of Jesus's grace. And who in the world are we to hold bitterness towards our spouse or to just nitpick them? But man, I leave loving Jesus every time more, and as a result, loving my wife more, because I want the grace of Jesus to flow out of me onto her. So what I love the most about Grace Marriage is, yes, I love the fellowship, I love the teaching, but it's saturated in Jesus. And you can't behold Jesus more clearly and not walk away not loving your spouse more clearly.
Brad, how many people were in this first group? How many couples did you have in there?
12 couples.
12 couples altogether. Are those couples still spending time together as a group, or have they moved on and led other groups? Or what's happened since then?
All of the above. Some are moved on to other groups. The core of us are still in that same group 12 years later, and some of them have moved
Quarterly?
on.
You're still getting regulars every quarter?
We're doing quarterly. We have multiple ways to do it. We're just moving to a monthly option where we're going to try monthly for a while, but we've done quarterly for 12 years. And but there are other ways to do Grace Marriage as well.
Got it. So then, Jamus, for your church, what did Grace Marriage do there? How did it have a tangible impact on your church?
Well, I think when you think about the health of any local church, it always comes back to the health of the family. And you can't find a healthy family without finding a healthy marriage. So the more I thought and prayed about it, and just over the years, a healthy marriage leads to a healthy family. A healthy family leads to a healthy church, and a healthy church benefits society. So really the foundational piece of a healthy church at the end of the day comes back to marriage. And so as a pastor, I had just been convicted, in particular in the early years, that it isn't something we had prioritized. And I thought, this is foolish of me. If I want a healthy, vibrant, thriving church, it has to start at home. And so I would say it is, outside of Jesus himself, it has been the single most impactful thing that's happened at our church, and gathering over 100 couples to come together on a quarterly basis and grow in Jesus and grow in one another. It's changed the whole atmosphere.
So you didn't look at this, Brad, you talked a lot about trying to grow your business, right? That you were doing things, growing your law practice before Grace Marriage. You weren't looking at this as saying, we can get a lot more people in this church if we offer this, right? I mean, it wasn't a quid pro quo kind of thing. This was something that you needed to, there was a hole and you needed to fill it, and Grace Marriage was able to do that.
That's right. It's a proactive approach to having healthy, thriving marriages. So what I saw early on was this: I was doing nothing but crisis marriage counseling. Mm-hmm. So people come to the pastor when they're where Annie and I were year one. They're about at the divorce spot, and sometimes we can fix that, but oftentimes they're too far gone. But the Grace Marriage is proactive, and so we want to take couples that maybe they're already doing pretty well and just continue investing in them so that, Lord willing, they don't get to crisis point ever. So interestingly, what I've learned, and Brad could attest to this, is that we do far less crisis marriage counseling.
You see that as a pastor?
Oh, absolutely.
You don't do it as much?
I mean, we still do it some, but
Sure.
there's always anomalies, of course. And frankly, usually those people are not in Grace Marriage. But you just see couples smiling, and you see thriving marriages, and it's been an absolute game changer. And when marriage is healthy, kids are healthier. And so kids ministry and student ministry, really, if marriage is healthy, it affects the whole fiber of the church. And so the greatest thing we can do for kids is to see mom and dad have a good marriage. The greatest thing we can do for teenagers is to see mom and dad have a good marriage. And then they, Lord willing, are going to grow up and model that.
Annie, as somebody who's married to a pastor, having a program like this, does that provide a different environment in the church? I mean, have you seen the church evolve because this program's there?
Most definitely. I think what I'm noticing, just because I totally agree with what Jamus is saying, but just a different perspective on it, is that it's created authenticity in a lot of the people who've gone through the program, because when you go through it, you're not pretending like you have it all together. You're being vulnerable. You're letting people see your weakness.
You're sharing, you're opening, right?
And so I've noticed that, and that's been really encouraging. And I think it's very healthy that we are real with one another. We take off the mask and let people see our struggles.
So Brad, for you, because you're not only in this church, but you're in a couple hundred others, Grace Marriage, talk to me first of all, as a member of the church, what it does for you. And then secondly, the other churches where you've had Grace Marriage. Give us a little sense for what it does there.
Well, it makes me really proud of our church. Like, I've always wanted our church to be kind of a model, and our church has a great premarital process, a great ongoing marriage ministry, the 100 couples. We have a good crisis process. We have an intensive. So it makes me, I love our church, but it makes me even more proud of our church. So from our church standpoint, and Marilyn and I, we need it as bad as any couple in our church. I mean, I shared earlier episode, we had to bring in a third party recently because we had an issue we were stuck on and we didn't know how to handle it.
Right.
What do we do? I don't know.
A lawyer needs a mediator. That's interesting.
We were just totally stuck. So we argued for an hour and then finally agreed we can't fix this.
So what about for the other churches? The other churches around the country, what's happened there? Help us to understand that.
What's happened is those churches have typically done premarital counseling and crisis counseling, but they've had nothing for the marriage. And when a church leaves a space empty and you're surprised the evil one's having a heyday, you shouldn't be. Because the church is that important. Right. And when most churches have nothing to disciple or shepherd marriages, and most people didn't grow up with perfect examples in marriage, and like Jamus and like me and Annie and Mary, we didn't know how to do it. So we shouldn't be surprised at 40 to 50% in divorce, and a lot of others are stagnant and complacent when the church isn't involved. So in those other churches we're working with, I'm seeing them be part of the answer to the problem. Because what I believe will happen is a massive national movement where marriage discipleship ministry that's ongoing in the church becomes absolutely standard. There was a time no church had youth ministry. Now 99% of evangelical churches have
a youth
ministry.
program, right?
There was a time that nobody did premarital counseling. Then somebody started doing it, and they did a little bit more of it, and now everyone's got to have a premarital process. Yeah. Well, why in the world would you have youth and premarital and just zero marriage? It doesn't make any sense. So what I'm seeing in these 200 churches, they are part of the answer. Now, is it easy? No. We've had a crisis response mentality for decades as a church. So couples, when do you work on your marriage? When you duck and miss a shoot. That's when you work on it. If you're stable, you're okay, we're fine. When we first started, we'd have people sign up and they'd come to me and say, I want you to know we signed up, but I want you to know we're doing fine. I'm like, so if you're doing fine, you certainly should invest. And that's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. And that's the entire thing that plagues marriage and why it's not held in honor among all, but ridiculed by most. It has to be growth, sanctification, and investment, not stagnancy, crisis, and counseling.
Let's go back to seminary, because in seminary, it's not only learning how to be a preacher, but it's maybe to be a counselor, to be a pastor, to be in a situation where you can help. How much in terms of classes was there about marriage?
I think there was one class that was offered as an elective called
Not required?
called Marriage and Family. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for growth in seminaries. Knowing what we know now on this side, if I could go back and start a seminary or try to give any kind of counsel to a seminary, I would say this is just as important as learning to read Greek and Hebrew. Because if we're producing brilliant theologians who know the Bible, but they don't know how to love their spouse well, then the Apostle Paul said they can't manage a church.
So then, is there conversation among other pastors? Meaning, pastors always talk to people they went to seminary with, somebody they know across town, whatever. We're trying to all pull the rope in the same direction, right? We're all trying to save souls. We're all trying to get people to have a relationship with God, with Jesus. But at the same time, is there discussion about marriage and the role in the church in marriage? When you go to conventions, when somebody's on a sabbatical and they come through and stop at your church, are pastors talking about those things? Are we there yet?
I don't think, generally speaking, we are. I think usually when pastors get together, we're talking about church growth, and we're talking about kids ministry or how do we assimilate people. All great things, all very important things, but I don't think the centrality of marriage in the church.
Why are we not?
One theory, I can say for seasons in our life, I would feel like a hypocrite if we've not been doing well. I can't preach on marriage or encourage other people to invest in their marriage. Heck, I'm not even worth imitating. So that's a theory that's not for all. A lot of pastor friends have amazing marriages. But I think for some, they would feel hypocritical to emphasize marriage. And I think for others, it's just kind of out of sight, out of mind. And it's just, if it doesn't generate revenue or numbers, I hate to say that.
Right.
But in the American church, there's so much focus on growth and numbers. I just don't know that that's at the top of the list for a lot of guys.
Yeah, Annie, for you as someone who's married to a pastor, having a program like this, what does it do for your church? What do you see Grace doing for your church, for families, for young couples who don't have kids, couples who have teenagers, couples who are empty nesters at this point? What's it doing?
Yeah, I think it's something that we see that we were desperate for when we first got married and we had no community come around us. So it's giving support. It's giving community. You're not supposed to do these things alone, right? We were created by the Godhead 3 in 1. So we were made for community. We were made to do life in community. And so it is creating that environment where you're doing life in community. So I think a lot of times discipleship is, we view it as let's sit down and learn all these things and get them in our head. And what discipleship really is living like Jesus, looking at Jesus. And that does involve marriage and walking our lives in the way that he walked his life on the earth. And so discipleship is more than just sitting and learning. It's living it out and going from the head to the heart.
Are you guys still doing date nights?
Yeah, we are. Not as much as we need to be doing, if we're going to be honest. We did have a really good date night last night. And so we get it. It's hard. It's hard to make that happen every single week.
Where are you with kids? How old are your kids at this point?
You want to?
Yeah, 16, 15, and 13.
Okay. So you're right in the midst of the teens. And
yeah, it's easier to leave, though, because they can be home alone.
Well, but an example about, and I told Brad this, our last marriage coaching session was, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And one of the things we discussed were date nights. And I was convicted that we had gotten away from the regularity. I mean, we were just kind of sporadic. Hey, we're going to date night, but it wasn't intentional. And so I walked away convicted. I think Annie did too. And so one of our takeaways from our last session was we got to get back to weekly date night. So now it's Wednesday nights for us, and I think we're at like 4 in a row now, which for us is good because it's been a challenge over the years.
You can get in a habit or out of a habit in a hurry, can't you?
That's right. But honestly, without that quarterly checkup, we probably wouldn't have rectified that. And so it was just a good convicting reminder.
So what's a date night look for y'all? What's it look like? I mean, they talked about they go and they run together. They're kind of sick. But I mean,
and we
don't do that.
Run when someone's chasing.
We need the PG version too, please.
So what is, I mean, seriously, I mean, is it just doing something together, or is it saying we're always going to go out to dinner, we're going to go to a movie and throw pizza at each other?
Well, I mean, last night, as an example, we went to a local restaurant and just, it was funny because...
And this was always no kids, is that right? Date night was just the two of you, okay.
Well, it was funny. One of ours had a rough day yesterday, and Annie texted me. She said, hey, I feel like maybe we should bring them along. And I was like... And I wanted to because they were kind of sad, and I was like, you know what though, we're giving them an example, and so I said, let's do our date night, then we'll take them to get ice cream after, and we did
you
that.
Could do both.
Yeah, but last night we just sat for an hour and a half, and just it was funny because I said, let's try not just to talk about all the problems in life. You know, you tend to do that, but Annie said, yeah, I kind of need a safe space just to vent because she had some things going on she'd been dealing with, and so it was good. It was just it's a chance just to be honest and to share our hearts and to be intentional.
Who plans them?
Generally, Jamus is the planner in the family.
Always been that way?
For the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're just spontaneous and just tell me where we're going?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Just along for the ride.
Unless I don't like where we're going, and then I'll comment.
So for you, what is a perfect date night? I mean, for you, if you were to pick, and it sounds like he does a lot of the planning, but if you were to pick, what hits that spot for you? What makes you happy when it comes to your husband taking you on a date?
Okay. It would not be running. Absolutely no running. But I mean, just doing something together outside. I enjoy being in nature. So hiking, walking, and talking. I enjoy food. So going to a new restaurant, trying new things, and anything with music, maybe theater. But I'm a little picky on theater too. He's purchased some theater tickets that were duds, and so I think he's a little hesitant to do that again. But I
want to just comment how far they've come, because Jamus was the lead pastor of a church that grew very quickly, from 25 to almost 1,000. And I remember when you first asked me to be pastor. I mean, I remember you and Tara looked sad and flat, but the church was requiring more and more out of our pastors. Yeah. And Jamus and our pastors reoriented life such that their wives now feel that they're more important than the church, when there was a time that they unintentionally made the church feel more important than them. So I really think that our pastors at our church are setting an example for other church, that a healthy growing church has pastors that prioritize their marriage over church growth.
yeah.
I mean, it sounds to me like you're different lines of work. You're running a church, you were running a law practice. You were prioritizing a church, you were trying to grow a law practice. That means that you and Marilyn were on the outside looking in. I mean, how much are the four of you able to talk about those similarities? You're a little bit ahead in terms of age of where you all are. And how much are you looking to the older people and saying, hey, how did you get through that? And you for Marilyn, how much does that happen?
Well, I would say, I mean, and don't want to, make Brad and Marilyn uncomfortable, but their example to Annie and I and to our whole church has been an absolute gift from the Lord. I don't know where Annie and I would be, or our church would be, if God would not have supernaturally crossed our paths at Old South Barbecue. Like, there was more going on there.
The yellow vest.
In particular, in the yellow, thank goodness he's wearing a shirt under the yellow vest. But no, like the Lord, I think, used Brad and Marilyn's influence and love for us. Because, I was going to be the guy that was going to sacrifice my family on the altar of ministry. I was just set up for that.
You could see it coming?
I was just going to be that guy. Not intentionally, but I was, and God gave Brad and Marilyn that insight. And it was a game changer, not just for us, but by God's grace, I hope our kids. I'm just not going to sacrifice my marriage or family on the altar of ministry. So that means saying no to things in ministry. I've said no to opportunities over the years that would have been great and influential, but to do so would have put my family on the back burner, and I'm not going to do that. But that's because of Brad and Marilyn's influence.
Yeah. You've had opportunities to do other things, to perhaps do something different than what you started here. Why have you stayed where you are?
Why don't you answer that?
Oh, goodness. I think we just love the people, and we felt God giving us a peace to stay here, and we just couldn't imagine going or doing ministry anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just, a few years ago, there was an opportunity that was presented to us to move and to lead a different church. On paper, it would have been a dream opportunity. You know, I couldn't have drawn it up any better for my future and our family. But in the 11th hour, we changed our mind and decided to stay in Owensboro because we just love our church and we love the people. And we couldn't imagine doing life and ministry anywhere else. And so, man, don't leave people that you love if you don't have to. Don't take people for granted and community for granted.
And the same goes for your spouse, right? The same goes for it's not just a matter of saying all these other things in our life, and oh, by the way, our spouse is separate. And it's the same, right?
And Jamus, I don't know if I'd ask you, but my experience, because Marilyn and I came close to moving several years ago too, but it completely made us more appreciative of our church and of Owensboro and the people around us and supportive. So getting to the edge of possibly going somewhere really completely was a game changer, the level I appreciate and love this church and this community. So it was, as hard a process as it was, I have a better existence here because of it. I don't know if you have the same experience, J-Mo.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't realize how much you love a place and a people until you almost leave them. And all of a sudden, the grass sure looked greener on the other side, and until you actually step into it, you're like, man, I got to go back home real fast. And sometimes it takes that pivotal moment, like a crossroads in your life, where what do I really value? Is it largeness? Is it size? Is it prestige? Is it the dollar? Is it influence? Or is it people? In a place, in a community.
And on the marriage front, it's like, it's just always keeping marriage in its proper place. Because one author, I think it was Tim Keller, said, if anything comes ahead of your marriage except Jesus, your marriage will slowly die. So if it's church growth, if it's profession, if it's law practice, if it's grace marriage, if it's whatever, if anything comes ahead of your spouse. And when you violate biblical order, things start breaking down. Things start breaking down. So what we want to do is help couples and help pastors and help churches put marriage in its rightful place such that everything else grows healthily.
That's what Grace Marriage is about, and we very much appreciate you sharing your walk, not only with each other, but also within the church with Brad and Marilyn, and how it has made a huge difference on your church. And thanks for being a witness. We appreciate that.
It's an honor.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Jamus and Annie Edwards, our guests, our first guest. And you can always remember that, right? For forever and ever, you can make sure Brad and Marilyn know. We were the first guest, by the way, on your podcast.
Guinea pigs.
You were the pilot the first time around. You're a pilot for the next time around as well. Grace Marriage Podcast. Again, make sure you like, make sure you follow, subscribe, so you always get more great content like this as we talk about grace marriage and the importance of both in our world these days.
Thank you for joining us on the Grace Marriage Podcast. We really hope you're feeling inspired to take intentional steps to grow in your marriage.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Your support helps us spread the message of grace and reach even more couples.
And if you have a moment, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a lot to us and helps others discover the podcast.
To learn more about how you can grow in your marriage, visit us at gracemarriage.com. Keep building stronger, grace-filled marriages.
We'll see you next week on the Grace Marriage Podcast. Until then, keep growing in grace.